Thanks everybody for coming. It's getting close to Christmas, so our job as woodworkers is to make gifts. Amongst other things, is to make gifts at for Christmases and birthdays and anniversaries and all those things. Um, what I usually like to do in terms of a gift is make something that's not only nice but is also practical and can be used. Um, Number of these gifts are sort of kitchen items, and a few are a little bit a little bit more decorative, I guess. So I think the process we're going to go through here tonight is I'm going to go over the five gifts, just a very brief outline on how I made them, and a few tips. And then after each one, we'll open things up for a couple questions, and you can ask me if you have anything about that specific gift, and then we'll move on to the next one. And if we have time at the end, I'll talk about a little bit about wooden gift wrapping, if that sounds kind of fun, and maybe even a few thoughts on finishing. So the first one, end grain cutting board. This is one that I use probably once a week or so. I tend to use it more for a serving platter because I think it looks nice, but you can easily cut on it as well. Now, with an end grain cutting board, they can get very, very elaborate, all sorts of different species and different patterns. And I mean, they look absolutely fantastic. And if you want to go that route, great. But it does take quite a lot of time, and time isn't what most of us have in December leading up to the holidays. So this one I designed very simply. It probably takes if you take out the dry time for the glue, it probably takes about probably an hour, maybe less. So you'll notice that it's just a repeating pattern, right? All I've done is taken a board. This is just a piece of pine here, but any piece of wood, and dress it to the width that you want the finished board to be, maybe a little bit wider, and dress it to the thickness that that you want each piece to be. Probably doesn't really matter really when it comes down to it. So just keep it as thick as you can, and dress both sides. Joint one face, plane the other, and then all you need to do is cross cut it. So you have multiple pieces, and this is just an example here. You cross cut it and you rotate them 90 degrees, and you put them back together, glue up all the faces, and you're done, right? So the important thing is to know that whatever length you cut these individual pieces to is going to be pretty much the same as the thickness of the final cutting board, because as the piece rotates, that's your end grain surface there. So that's your thickness. And when we glue them up, you should use a few longer cauls. You could probably use, when I glued this one up, I probably had one or two cauls going along the bottom and probably two going across the top. Use a few clamps just to keep all these pieces even. And once you do that, you can apply a bit of pressure coming in from both ends with a couple clamps and let it to dry. This way, when the glue has dried, all these pieces are going to be very even. So I find the only thing I need to do is once the glue is completely dry, I can just hit it with my belt sander, and on both sides, and just slightly trim the edges flush, and it's good to go. That's it. You could get fancy and you could rotate these. Rotate one this way, rotate one this way, rotate one this way. And do that as you go down the glue up. You could also, it's a different look if you put one this way and then the next one this way, one this way and this way. It just gets a little bit fancier, right? And if you really want it to get just a little bit fancier again, there's nothing wrong with even taking this board, ripping it a few pieces lengthwise and staggering those, or doing, turning them end for end. But I really like the simpler look myself. And I know a lot of people don't like sapwood. This is just sapwood here. I'm gonna come a little bit closer. Um, so as you can see, this is cherry, and you've got sapwood on the ends. And a lot of people, especially with cherry, they'll get rid of that sapwood right away. But I really like it. To me, that's it reminds you that this was a living tree once, and the color combination I think is really nice. So I tend to leave. I It's not that I tend to leave sapwood in; it's that I actually look for sapwood, especially when there's a high contrast, like cherry, walnut, that sort of thing. Um, Make sure you use a waterproof glue, because even though this should never go through the dishwasher, it's going to get dirty. You're going to wash it, or the person who you give it to is going to wash it. So just use a waterproof glue, like a Type Bond 2, or a Type Bond 3. There's many different types of waterproof glue on it. So that's a real quick overview of that end grain cutting board. Any thoughts on or any questions on that, Jen?
No questions at this point.
Okay, great. Put that back. So that's I make a lot of those because everyone seems to need an end grain, or it seems to need a cutting board, and the fact that it's an end grain cutting board is a nice touch. So
I
keeping with it,
Sorry,
sure,
I just had two questions come through.
yeah, sure.
Um, okay, so can that be put through the planer after glue up?
That's possible. There's a very, very good chance that when the planer, when the board, this is your cutter head, as the piece is going through it. There's a very good chance that, first of all, because you're planing end grain, there's a very good chance that you're going to get a lot of chipping on there. If you have a helical, a spiral cutter head, you're going to have a better chance of success. Um, and then also at the end where it exits the board, you're going to almost for sure you're going to lose quite a chunk off the end, because usually you have the grain going like so, and a a cutter head is going to just take those shavings up nicely. But as soon as you put it on its end, it's sort of going against the grain. I guess you could say. So I wouldn't. That's why I use the cauls on both faces. You can also try to use cauls come in from the side, keep them all aligned if you want. And when you do use the cauls and you use some clamps along it, it brings all these individual pieces almost perfectly flush. And you really shouldn't need much more than a belt sander with maybe a 60 or 80 grit belt on there to smooth that surface. Uh, Another question, Jen?
Okay, thank you. Two questions, kind of similar. So, type of protective coating that is advised, and what finish do you use on the cutting board? Those are the two questions.
Well, it's we could do a whole show, a whole webinar on finishing for these types of things, but generally speaking, all finishes will be food safe once they're fully cured. So if you think someone's going to use this as an actual cutting board and they're going to really chop it and get the knives in there and whatnot, I would tend to use an oil finish, a penetrating oil finish. You could use a tung oil. There's many different types that will just sort of sink into the wood and won't form a film on it. This one I've actually used because I knew I wasn't going to do any cutting on it. I used a film finish. This is an oil-based polyurethane, and put probably 2 or 3 coats on it, so it gives it a bit more protection. But if you put a thicker film finish on, you're prone to sort of uh, with use chipping it off, and it's not as easy to refinish. So if it is a penetrating oil finish, it's a lot easier to refinish. In fact, my next project that I'll show in a sec, I literally just added another coat of tung oil to them about 20 minutes ago, because it just sort of needs refreshing once in a while. And you just wipe it on and let them dry for a day or so, and you're good to go. So hopefully that answers your question there.
Perfect. We'll do one more and then we'll move along.
Sure.
What is the difference between end grain and side grain?
Good question. So this is sort of a woodworking 101 um, topic, but it is an important one. So you have a board, right? This is how it was grown in the tree, straight up and down. And when it's cut, you have this, your very typical looking face grain. I mean, I guess technically this is side grain. There's truly no difference. It's just that this is the side of the board and this is the face of the board. They're essentially the same. The end grain is different. I'll only spend maybe 20 seconds or so on this, but think of wood like a collection of drinking straws that are bound together, that are moving up and down the piece of wood. Whether it's the face grain or the side grain, essentially the same, but the end grain, it acts differently. It accepts moisture differently. It machines differently. If you touch the faces of those straws, they're smooth, whereas on the ends they're almost, I don't want to say they're prickly, but they're just, there's more sort of texture to them, right? So it changes how it needs to be machined, and it also changes how wood is likely to split, if it's going to split at all. It's very rare that a piece of wood will split this way. It's much more likely that it will split parallel with the grain. And in this case, this question maybe came up when I was talking about planing a piece like this. Because we've turned them all on their end, and you're planing the end grain, they're much more likely to chip out that way. So I should probably hold that there, but we do have a couple of articles on our website that talk about this in a lot of detail. They talk about the drinking straw analogy and how that affects the wood, that in terms of machining it. So maybe we can send that out, Jen. We should make a note of that.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. So the next project I mentioned, I just finished it, refinished it. Chopsticks. Super simple. There's a lot of options for embellishing, and I mean they're just nice little projects. Some people don't use chopsticks, and that's fine. But if you know someone who does use them, they'll really appreciate them. Um, you know, uh, we did write. I did write an article probably about 10 years ago on how to make chopsticks. I won't go into the details because it's going to be on our website. If you're a subscriber, all of those articles are free. I For that matter, I believe anyone can go on there and read the article for free. Um, a few quick tips. Layout is key. Once you have the rough blank, this is probably about a quarter inch by a quarter inch by, oh, I don't know, about 10 inches or so. Once you have this rough blank, use a pencil to mark out center lines on the faces and across the ends, and that will give you something to work to. And as you're using a hand plane to sort of to remove wood more towards one end than the other, you should always be checking to see if the chopstick that you're making is straight, and you can take a little bit more off one side or the other just to keep it straight. Another tip I would use is use a very hard wood. Don't make these out of pine or something like that because, as you can imagine, they will flex quite a bit. These are not big thick items, right? And nor do you want them to be. So make them out of a hardwood. I've got some rosewood here. I've got some babinga. I've made them out of maple before. As long as it's hard maple, it's just barely strong enough. But it's a great way to use some exotic woods. And last thing I'll say about these is about embellishing. I'll bring a few a little closer to you so you can see what I'm talking about here. So here's one that I made years ago. I don't know if you can see it, but there's just a couple, well, 4 or 5 little notches around the end there. Nothing much. It doesn't take more than a few minutes to add that with a little knife. Carve little V's, little notches. Another idea, this is a little copper rod, 1/8 inch thick rod, I think it was. Drill a hole, put it in there with epoxy and trim it flush. Just a more unique approach to making, to a design, right? I believe this is one that my daughter actually made. Some wood burning. It's harder to see because it's a dark wood, but there's just a series of dots and lines that are, they just add a little bit of I don't know, a little bit of spice to this little project. So, but yeah, if you're essentially you need once you have your stock, you just need a block plane, something something along the lines of this, just a small block plane. You could use a medium-sized plane like a jack plane, something like that, if you wanted to, and a little bit of sandpaper to smooth them, and then maybe some tools to texture them or to add any sort of details. But they're really cheap in terms of material expenditure. They don't take too long, and you can even make a little what you call these things, almost like a little holder for the chopsticks if you really want to get fancy for them. Yeah, any thoughts? Any questions, Jen?
Not right now. We couldn't really see the folder. I think it was too far up.
Oh yeah, sure. It's there's 100 ways to make that, but it's just a little piece that will sit on the table. I mean, honestly, you don't need this. It's just a nice little detail that makes the whole it makes the whole gift just a little bit nicer, a little bit more special. So,
There is one question here. How do you hold
sure.
the chopstick while planing?
Good question. Usually what I will do is, uh, yeah, you can see this. So to do it freehand in the air is tough. Usually what I'll do is lay it right down on my workbench and overhang the little bit that I'm holding on to, and use the plane uh, just to work. And as I go, I can rotate it and keep going, keeping my eyes on the line, the layout lines, checking the end as well to see how I'm doing. And as long as it's supported the whole time, it works out. It works out quite well. It doesn't flex, and to do it in midair, as I said, is really really tough. Any other questions about that?
No, I think we're okay to move along.
Right. Now the final kitchen gift, simple one, the salt cellar. This is one that I made a couple years ago. Got 2 cavities, and it's a simple little gift. Essentially, what the process is, there is an article online talks about all the details, but essentially what I did was come closer to show you this came right out of a larger log, and as you can see, there's some texture And this was just the bark was right on this face. So I took the bark off, and it revealed just an interesting pattern and some bumps here. And so I thought I'm going to keep that, and I'll machine the rest of it to size. And once I had the rough blank that was about this size, I ripped off the top piece, ripped off the bottom piece, both about a quarter of an inch thick, and then I was able to hollow out these two sections here, and then I glued the bottom piece back on, so you can't even really tell, but the grain should line up quite nicely. If you look really close, you will see a joint across there, but if you look quickly, all the grain lines up, all the color lines up, and you'd really never even notice. That's why I cut the bottom off of this piece and then glue it back on. Same with the top. At that point, I smoothed the inside, glue the bottom back on, and then I made these pieces that hold the lid in place. So they just fit right inside the cavities. And the only tricky part I found is to glue these on. You have to do them. Um, you have to do it in such a way that the top that they're glued on the top, on the underside of the top, um, in the correct way, so that everything lines up, right? And the way I did that was took some scrap wood, put it inside here. Even I think I probably took a couple of paper towels just to give it a bit of cushioning, and it came up almost to the top of the cavity. And then when I would put these two pieces inside here, and they just fit perfectly and positioned perfectly in there, but they were slightly above the surface of this top. And then I was able to put some glue on them and position this top over top of them, clamp it down lightly, and the paper towels allowed it to just to press into the those two pieces on the underside, and it lined up really nicely. So, like I said, details all online. That's your Coles Notes version. That's your 2 minute version. But I've made a number of these, and everyone just really likes having a couple different salts, maybe just one salt. You could even make one with more if you wanted. I wouldn't make it too big, because at some point it's you have so much salt, it gets other stuff gets in there or whatnot. At the same time, I don't want it too deep either, because you can only get in there so easily with your hands, right? So sort of a medium size is appropriate as well. A quick finish on there, but I actually didn't finish the inside at all, because I didn't want to impart any sort of flavor or scent to the actual salt itself. Just a little bit of a wipe on varnish on the outside to give it a bit of protection against any sort of water or wear or whatnot. Um, yeah. Any questions on that one, Jen?
Yeah. There was a question, how did you hollow it out?
Well, if you remember, I took the bottom off. So at that point, I had this piece, the centerpiece, if you will, and I used. I think what I did is I drilled the corners out with I don't know, maybe a 1/2 inch diameter bit. So I drilled the four corners out of each one, and then I used probably a jigsaw or a coping saw, I can't quite remember, to remove all of the waste. And at that point, I could go in there and sand it up, just clean it up a little bit. And then when I put the bottom on, it almost looks like I've hollowed out these two cavities, but in actual fact, I just took the whole center section and completely took the middle two cavities out of it. Hopefully, that's a quick explanation of that.
So there's two questions here about gluing. So one, glue under lids before gluing bottom on, question mark?
No, so I went through that quickly. It, again, if you go online, there's a great article that shows everything. but I glued the bottom on first. And at that point, I had this exact piece just like this. So I could put a piece of wood in both of the cavities and a paper towel just to give it a bit of springiness, I guess you could say. And the thickness of that wood brought the paper towel up to just a little bit below the top of this surface. So that when I did take these two individual pieces, I fit them to the size, and then I put them in there, put a bit of glue on top of them, and then this box positioned those two pieces while I put that on top of it and lined up the top with the sides of the rest of the box and let that dry. A couple clamps on there. But yeah, the article online will show that a little bit more in detail and has some photos of the process as well. It was actually this actual box that I made in that article.
Perfect. I think Chad posted it in the chat, but we will also send out some links to these projects. So
Sure.
there's quite a few questions here, so I think there's a bit of confusion around the field.
Yeah, I understand.
My question is, couldn't you glue the underlid before the bottom?
Well, you could, but when you pressed the lid and these two small pieces down, you kind of need the bottom on it to provide force against the blocks inside. Because if you didn't have anything inside these cavities to hold these two small pieces up, they would just fall to the bottom, right? Hopefully that makes it's a tricky thing to describe quickly, but
Do you think the article will clear a lot of this stuff up?
I think so. Yeah, in terms of the steps, the article will clear that up quite well, I think.
Okay, perfect. I think we should probably move along then.
Sure. Okay. So the next one is also a box, and it's similar in how it's made, but it's got a much different look and feel to it. Come up and show you. Just a couple of lily pad boxes, and more for jewelry, coins, that sort of thing. I mean, you could say it's as much as a piece of art that can sit there and you can look at it as much as it's a functioning piece. But it does have a cavity for storing stuff in it. Construction process is actually the same, right? It has the top with this extra piece that positions the lid. And again, I've see closely. I've really hard to see. it, thankfully it's hard to see because that's the point of why I cut the bottom off the center section to keep the grain and the color all matching, right? And when you put it back together, it's really hard to tell that there was actually a joint there. At any rate, this is how I hollowed out this center section. Drilled a couple of holes in it and used a bandsaw or a scroll saw to cut out the whole shape. And then it, you have that cavity, and then you put the bottom back on to that center section. So it's very similar to the salt cellar and how it was constructed, the different stages. But one nicer thing about this is, a little bit of this is a piece of curly maple. It's slightly spalted. Even that alone looks nice, but this is a piece of curly maple that I've used. And as you can see, it leaves a really nice look to it. But if you want something a little bit different, you could add some texture to the top. And with the lily pad sort of theme I have here, I found the radiating lines that I've carved with a V gouge set it off quite nicely. What you can do for that top thousands of things, different texturing, maybe a bit of inlay, um, all sorts of options for that. So, um, that's really where your creativity has to come into play there. So, but again, this article on how I built that in detail is on our website as well, so we can send that out. Any thoughts or any questions on that one, Jen?
Not yet. Maybe we'll just wait a second. Sometimes they come in, but no, I think we're okay to move along.
Sure, okay. Right. The last, or the fifth one here is also a few interesting little boxes here. And the nice thing about these boxes is that the process is really quite quick. So essentially, what they have bring them up to you a little closer. So there's I'm going to change this light here. It's a lot easier when you see the texture on it. But the lid lifts off, simple cavity in the center. The piece on the bottom just realigns that lid quite nicely. And to make them is quite simple here. Just adjusting my light. All I've done was taken a piece, this piece right here is 1.75 inches square. And I've cut it to length. And it doesn't have to be 1.75 inches. It can be pretty much any size. This one is 1 1/8 inches. You can make them smaller or larger. And then cut them to whatever length you want. We have about 3.25 inches on this one. But like I said, they're all different height. They're all sort of different dimensions here. One thing that's important to mention first is that in order to drill the hole, you should have a flat bottom bit, like a Forstner bit. You could use a spade bit, but I'll show you what a spade bit does. Spade bit has a little burr on the center that's protrudes a little bit further. It helps drive the bit straight, but it may protrude through the bottom of your box if you're not careful. Though you could stop a little bit early. That's not a problem either. So either way, you have to make sure that you have the proper drill bit to make that cavity. And to be honest, it's flexible, right? Most of these, these boxes may not actually ever be used to put something in. They may be. It's hard to say what people want. They could just be art, right? But just probably see what bits you have that will work first, and just make sure you make the width and the thickness of the workpiece large enough so that you're not too close to that edge, right? As you can see, you want those side walls to be thick enough that they'll stand up, right? And the most interesting part of these boxes, as you can see, is the texture. And this one has these little grooves in the top section and the bottom section. And in all of these, I've made a V cut across the bottom, the same distance as the lid is thick. It just, because you have this lid here, you have this natural line visual. So I just wanted to match it on this side. So that's what I did first, the 4 lines around. And then I just play around with different texture. I did that with a carving gouge. Just did a lot of little grooves like that. This is a V tool was used. to put a cross hatch pattern on that. The bottom matches up with that. On this one, it's a taller box. This is out of Wenge. Is hopefully you can see it. It's some texture that I've added with a rotary tool, just a Dremel, probably a 1/8 inch round bit on it. And so top and bottom, same sort of thing. And as you can see, little cavity, a little piece that I've just shaped and glued on to that as well. And use the same sort of technique of filling that cavity with something so that when I put this little piece on, into that top of the cavity, it didn't drop down. And then I can press a bit of, press the lid on and the glue will dry. So, and again, all of this one as well was included as an article a number of years ago. So it'll take you through the process, but it really is quite simple. Were there any questions on that one, Jen?
Yeah, we have a couple.
Sure.
Um, could you make these boxes in the same way as the salt cellar and drill right through and then glue the base back on?
Sure. Yeah, definitely. Um, yeah, there's nothing saying that you couldn't do that. Mind you, if it's a taller box, like this one here is 5.5 inches, it's not there's not many drill presses that or even bits that will allow you to drill a hole that deep and that far into it. So you may run into some certain sort of logistical challenges with that. But there's nothing saying you couldn't do it the same way. But like I said, you could use a spade bit and not worry about that center tip protruding further. You can stop the hole earlier, and probably more often than not, it won't even matter that there's a V at the bottom of the hole. Spade bits are relatively inexpensive, and they come in a lot of sizes too. So that's definitely an option as well.
Okay, so we have three questions and they're all pretty much similar.
Sure.
I'm going to read all of them to you. And so, how did you make the circular piece for the lid? Did you turn the little piece to fit the hole?
Mhm.
And how do you make the little piece that fits exactly?
Right. Well, in all the cases, all I did was took the same species of wood. This is African mahogany, and I just I cut off an end grain, had a piece around, but I sliced I cross cut the workpiece at maybe about a eighth of an inch or so. This isn't maybe 3/16 at most. And so I have this was end grain as well, though you really could do it in side grain, doesn't matter. And then I just shaped it by hand on I probably used a bit of part bandsaw, and then part belt sander to shape it, and then just glued it on. So some of the other ones, well, yeah, just a really simple approach to that, cut it out and glue it on. It looks it should be the same color wood, so it looks the same, but it is actually just a piece that's applied to that to the underside of that lid.
Right. With the texturing, what kinds of finish would you recommend?
Oh boy, that's a big question. That in a couple weeks we're actually going to have a texturing webinar, so I will be talking a little bit about finishing. Um, as for a short 10-second answer, it you can do any finish you want, right? I prefer probably a sprayed finish because it doesn't leave any, from if you use a cloth to wipe it on, it won't leave any lint or anything like that on the texture, and it will get into the texture as well. Um, you also want to consider sanding between coats because it's very easy to sand a flat surface, but you have to it, you have to consider if you even want to sand the texture part. Um, so I probably said too much already, but we will be going into that in a couple of weeks. The whole seminar will be on just texturing wood, and part of that will include finishing. So join us for that. We'll have fun with that one. That's one of my favorite topics.
Okay, we can move along. Thank you.
Sure. So I think what I'd like to do now, those are five. I did have another one, a picture frame, but um, okay, we'll do it quickly. And then I have three other quick things that I'd like to talk about. A picture frame, super simple. It can be customized to whatever size you want. What I've done here, I'll come a little closer to see. Usually picture frames are made out of solid wood. This one, if you can see, it's made out of Baltic birch plywood. The reason why I did that, I sort of have been building some stuff out of Baltic birch lately, and I like the sort of the modern, sort of simple look it has, especially the edges of these boards. And I thought it would make an interesting picture frame as well. It actually saves a bit of time from all the lumber breakout. You've already got your material at whatever this is 3/4 of an inch wide or thick, I should say. So all I did was rip lengths to what were they? That's about an inch and 3/8 or so. You can make them bigger. I wouldn't make them much smaller. And then I machined a rabbet on the inside so that it can accept the glass, the pitcher, and a backer. And then I machined a very slight round over on the front. This is actually optional. You don't need the round over. Uh, there's a slight round over to it. But like I said, you really don't need that round over. Even faster if you just leave it square. Um, and at that point, I cut the miters according to how big I wanted the frame. Reinforce them just slightly. Very hard to see, but there's a dowel going through there, and a couple on the top there. And actually, what I've used for that is skewers, bamboo skewers that you get for barbecuing, that sort of thing. They're about 1/8 of an inch thick, and they work. They're strong. They're very cost effective. Drill a hole through there, pop it in with some glue, and that will strengthen that joint quite a bit. And you can do a couple coming down from the top, and then you've got yourself a bomb-proof joint there. For the back, super simple. I love these little things. They're just little glass clips. Got those from Lee Valley. Um, drill a 1/2 inch hole on the drill press, and a pilot hole to accept that screw. And these actually come in different um, depths or heights. I'm not sure how you'd describe it, but you can see the prongs on this. This is probably about 5 millimeters or 1/4 of an inch. You can get them flush. You can also get them to protrude longer. So you get whichever ones you need, and that will hold everything in. This is just a piece of 1/8 inch masonite that's been, it's just the white version. You can get metal hanging clips. I just made 1/4 inch thick, probably not even quite a 1/4 inch thick, piece of wood, put a bit of a notch on it so it won't slide off, and glued it to the other side. Really simple, really effective. This has been hanging in my home for a few years, and it works great. So after that, you've got a quick finish to apply, and people always, like, everyone wants a frame for something. Um, they have kids, they have friends, family. They went on a holiday, whatever it is. If you could get them to give you the picture first, that'd be great. But that's kind of it sometimes spoils the surprise, right? The other option is to maybe use a mat, because then you can make the frame whatever size you need, or you just make the frame according to the normal 8.5 by 11 sizes, or whatever you got. So um, yeah, that's a quick overview there, but they really everyone I've made a frame for. We had some friends over the other day who were saying, "I wish I knew someone who made a frame." So now I got to make one for them. Anyways, it's all good. So any questions about that one, Jen?
Not so far.
Okay. If you do have any questions on that, just post them there. That's six projects I gave you. Um, one quick, a couple quick thoughts on finishing. Right, if you're like me, it's December 23rd, maybe even the 24th, and you've got stuff to do. So the biggest thing about a finish is you want it to dry fast. Fastest drying finish is a shellac. Right? It will dry. You can put on multiple coats minutes apart, and you do have to put on more coats because it builds thinner. But you can have it a project, like some of these, you can have them done in a matter of an hour or two, and that's super helpful when you're in a bit of a time crunch. Another option I use, to speed things along is a water-based, polyurethane. You can get little spray bombs, spray intricate textures, intricate pieces, smaller pieces. They work great, and the coats can go on fairly quickly as well. Put on a coat, and you probably only have to wait about an hour or two before you put on another one, and then another hour or two before you put on a third coat, and that's usually enough to give you some good protection. Um, there's an outside chance that I'd use something like a Rubio or an Osmo, where you can put on just one coat of a sort of a penetrating oil, or an oil wax finish, and it doesn't dry as fast, but it is just one coat, right? And as long as you don't have to wrap the piece right away, you could have oil coming through the paper or something like that. It'll dry pretty well overnight. So those are I'd stay away from oil based finishes, like a varnish or polyurethane, because they take so long to dry. But the shellac, water based poly, and possibly a single coat finish like a Rubio would be an option as well. Um, any thoughts on finishing? Questions? Went through that a little fast, but I just wanted to give you those three tips, because it's it's one thing to make this beautiful project, then you go, oh shoot, I gotta put a finish on this thing. And if you choose the wrong finish, it's going to take a full day for each coat to dry, and you have to put on three, maybe four coats, right? So that's not the sort of thing you want. Questions about that, Jen?
No questions. Somebody just commented lacquer dries pretty quickly as well.
That's true. That's true. Especially, you can get a spray lacquer at a lot of home improvement stores, and it does dry pretty quickly. And it also, if you're dealing with texture or small intricate projects like that, I really do like the little spray bombs for that. So you've made your project, you've finished it. That's usually where people stop, right? They wrap their gifts with paper and put a bow on them, that sort of thing. But here's two quick thoughts for you. My kids made these. They're little gift tags, right? Can be almost anything, right? You can write your name on there, to mom, from me. Use a little ribbon, put it on there. You could uh, you could draw a little Santa on there. You could be you know just get creative with what you put on there. This is a piece of maple, piece of a cherry. Make them any size you want. Um, there's so many designs. Even just look at paper gift tags, and you can come up with different shapes or different ideas. You can write on here with pen. You could write on here with Sharpie. What I also often do is use a wood burning pyrography pen to write that on there as well. Who it's to and who it's from, that sort of thing. So, that's just going a little bit of an extra mile. I mean, even if you don't make the project that's being wrapped up, you can still make these. I mean, you can batch these out in a matter of minutes almost. Um, Sizing, you can make it whatever you want, but these are about 4 inches long, 3/4 of an inch wide, and maybe 3/16 inches thick. I mean, these are basically offcuts. And drill a hole, shape them a bit, sand them up, and you've got yourself a customized tag. So that's a lot of fun. And it lets people know that you've done a little bit for them. You care. It's fun to do, and they get a kick out of that. The last thing I like to talk about is, we all have these beautiful shavings, right? Hand plane shavings, and they're cool. But you can also wrap a present. Not I shouldn't say wrap a present, but you can use them as ribbon to go around a present. You can even use a few of them. If you had 2 or 3 of those, and you glued them together at some points, then you have a bow, right? Or it looks just like a ribbon that's been sort of curled with a knife or a pair of scissors, right? And super simple. If you're a woodworker, chances are pretty good you've got a hand plane, should be fairly sharp. And I usually work with softwood for this, but every wood, denser wood gives you a bit of a different look. Softer wood, or not so much look, but effect, right? How curly it is. You can also adjust the depth of your cut. This is a reasonably thin cut, and you get these sort of softer, almost fluffy shavings. Whereas if you open up that throat a bit and drop that blade down, you're going to get really thick shavings that are really sort of tight curly cues, right? So you can use that as a bow, or you can also take long strips and use them to wrap up presents. I probably should have cut this a little thicker. It's a little delicate. But if this was wrapped in paper, you could then put this around the gift, use a little bit of glue. You could use hot melt glue or wood glue. Glue that on. You have another one going the other way, and you can even leave the excess on, and it'll act as sort of a natural. That's a quick job here, but it'll act as a natural bow there, right? And it's just fun. People, they just are surprised that you've done this. They've just never seen it before, right? And if you're really in a jam for a gift, it's always you go to the liquor store, you get a bottle of something, and this will essentially just fit right over the neck of that bottle, and there you go. You've got a gift wrapped bottle of whiskey or whatever you've got, right? You'll realize that you can play around with a few things. As I mentioned, the wood species will give you a different effect. The thickness will give you a different effect. And even if this is my board here, if I plane it straight, you'll get a perfectly kind of straight curl out of it. But if I skew my plane, you're going to get a lot more dynamic looking shavings, right? So you can skew it just a little bit or more. You can use a few different species in here. I mean, there's all sorts of different things we can do with that. So it's just kind of a cool idea, as woodworkers. I've actually walked into a friend of mine to their house, and this that I gave them, months before, they still had this. They just liked it. It's cool. I mean, it looks nice, and I agree. It's like it's art. I don't know. Thanks, everybody.